it's a great thing to not drink the mainstream Kool-Aid. Sooner or later, the lemmings are going to get it wrong and they're going to go charging off that cliff. Biden said we have the greatest economy in the world. If you believe the United States economy is the greatest in the world, you're going to make investment mistakes. Now, on the flip side, just to be equal opportunity here, Trump said much the same when he was in the White House. And if you believe that, then you made investment mistakes. Left wing, right wing doesn't matter. If you're in one of the mainstream camps, you get surrounded by your echo chamber of people that believe the same that you do. This sets you up for failure. You have to be independent to be a contrarian.
On this episode of the Liberty Ventures podcast, I'm joined by Lobo Tiggre, who doesn't come from the venture space, but rather from the resource speculation space. Now, I love Lobo's story where he spent his early career in the nonprofit world, similar to me, but then decided to make the transition from advocating for capitalism to being a capitalist who also advocates for capitalism. But in his role now of doing resource speculation recommendations and exploration, he gives insights to what the difference is between speculating and investing, and gives advice for how to be successful there with contrarian thinking while still being skeptical of everything that's presented, including his own advice. This was a really fun conversation with some great insights for thinking about how to invest, how to speculate, that I hope you'll benefit from as much as I did. Check it out. I want to start by giving you a chance to share your story with everyone because it's a fascinating one. I know this especially since you didn't start in the for-profit world. You started in the nonprofit space and transitioned into it, like a number of other people in the ecosystem, including myself.
I was just going to say, present company included.
I'd love to just give you a couple of minutes to share your background and what led you to doing what you're up to today.
Well, so the short version is yes, I worked in the nonprofit sector for a long time, and it was fairly non-profitable for me. And that wasn't really it. It wasn't just like, oh, I got tired of being the nice guy and the other guy's driving all the Ferraris. But trying to keep it short. But this is a story here. But what really happened was I was working with the Henry Hazlitt Foundation in Chicago. There were half a dozen libertarian millionaires around town that supported the foundation, and I'd routinely have lunch with them. And okay, I may not be the sharpest tool in the shed or brightest bulb in the box or whatever, but I did notice after a while of hanging out with these guys that none of them wore black capes or a snidely whiplash mustache. They didn't tie girls to the railroad tracks on the weekend for fun, right? You know, these rich bastards were cool people. They were interesting. And by the way, of the six of them, five were completely self-made. And the one guy that could argue was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, turned it into a gold spoon with his own efforts. And it was striking to me that, you know, again, they didn't just get lucky or win a lottery ticket. They saw some kind of opportunity. One of them saw a pattern in the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and he wrote a computer program to exploit it, and he sold it to Goldman Sachs for $125 million, as I recall. I may not have all the numbers quite right, but something like that. Another one was one of the first entrepreneurs to go to China to open up an evil sweatshop to make Reebok sneakers or something like that. And of course, you know, the Chinese people flooded to this evil sweatshop that had good lighting and bathrooms and, you know, things like that. those, you know, air conditioning, those nice luxuries in the evil sweatshop. But it was things like that. It was people that saw some sort of opportunity, some value in the world or a way to create value, took action, delivered it, and got compensated appropriately. So that really, a light bulb went off somewhere in my head that I've been arguing for free enterprise my entire adult life. I've been a champion of capitalism, but I never tried doing it myself. And furthermore, the fact that I felt somewhat surprised, and of course I didn't expect the black capes and the snidely whiplash mustache, but I said that for a reason. Like encountering these guys, it struck me like, wow, you know, these are pretty cool guys. And suddenly it, you know, the light bulb went off that, oh, I had an attitude here. I had an attitude problem. Like in my mind, without realizing it, even though I was a staunch free marketeer, I had imbibed the cultural Kool-Aid of rich people are mean. and it's bad to only care about money and all this stuff. This all you need is love, da 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 da, right? So the light bulb went off, and I realized, and I made a decision in my head. You know what? I'm going to learn about money. I've talked about capitalism, but I had never bought a stock. I didn't know what a warrant was. I had never done any investing. I had never really been serious about money. As long as I had enough to feed my family, that's all I needed. I was busy saving the world. Um, and so I just made a decision. You know what? I'm going to learn about money. There's no reason why I have to be poor doing what I do. And these guys, as brilliant as they were, I didn't think any of them did anything that I couldn't have done in a similar circumstance. Right? It's not like they were supermen. And so I just made that decision. And this is important. I'm hammering on this point because I made the decision, and I kid you not, it was a couple months later that Doug Casey and David Galland offered me a position at Casey Research. Now, they had just started the company. They knew me as a writer. Again, I wasn't an investor. They wanted help with the editorial side. And had they made that offer before I made my decision, before I had my epiphany, I would have said no. I was busy saving the world. I felt good. I felt motivated by my non-profitable work. But having made that decision, then I thought, you know what? Yeah, I could do that. And it would be a lot more fun to be the guy writing the checks than the guy asking for the checks. And so I went with it. And David likes to say it was like a fish to water. I don't want to pat myself on the back too much, but I really loved it. I enjoyed it. I love geology. I was a kid that collected rocks. And when those obnoxious drivers that slows down on the highway, if there's a road cutting, to look at what the heck the geology did there, right? That sort of thing. And I like to travel, and I like to write, and they paid me to do all three of those things. It was I couldn't have come up with a better job myself. So I learned, I was hungry. I got if I got luck, it was that I knew somebody. It wasn't my qualification, certainly. It's just I knew somebody, and they gave me an opportunity to do something that was interesting to me, and I ran with it. And that was in 2004. True story. It was 2008. It was the first time that I can consciously recall Doug coming to me one day and saying, "Hey, I have some money in these U.S. accounts. What do you recommend I do?" So somewhere between 2004 and 2008, my teacher and master was starting to not just value my work and opinion, but ask me for ideas and things. So if that gives some measurable indication of my level of progress, there you go. But that's it. To go back to the key point, it was that decision. It was that moment when I realized that I didn't have to tie girls to the railroad tracks in order to become rich. Silly as it sounds, right? That was what opened the doors. And then lo and behold, as the Zen saying goes, when the student is ready, the master will appear.
That's right. Or another way of putting this, one of the things that I've found in life is that when we are clear about our personal goals, what we really want to do, opportunities start appearing to us that may have actually been there all the time. Or maybe we create those opportunities because of our energy and our conversations and putting it out in the world brings them to us. But you being really clear on your new purpose to actually go out and be a capitalist, not just advocate for capitalism, led to this opportunity for you and set you on a completely different trajectory in life.
It did. And again, I don't want to wax too rhapsodic about how great I am or how wonderful but it's made a huge difference in my life, not only in having more than two quarters to rub together in my pocket, but like, you know, I really am passionate about teaching entrepreneurship and capitalism now. And I love teaching young people. And I got invited to do these things in Eastern Europe. And that's where you and I met. And that's why, to the audience, I always call him Sasha Makobin. Alexander is Sasha in Russian. So between us, it's always Sasha Makobin. Because I met him over there. And so in 2008, we had the GFC, the global financial crisis, and these programs ran into trouble. And they said, "Lobo, can you help?" And I could say yes. Like I could write the check and make it happen at that time, which was it was such a cool thing to be able to do, to believe in something, to see the value of it, to see the students go out into the world and make a difference and become, go to Silicon Valley and do startups and things. I have, as I'm a proud Papa Lobo of hundreds of entrepreneurs who've gone out and done things in the world, which is this is an amazing thing. And it wouldn't have happened had I, remained in my previous trajectory. I can't say that my nonprofit work did no good. Of course it did. But this was very direct, measurable. I could see it happening. I knew that I helped this person in A, B, and C way, and I could see the result, right? Um, I wouldn't have met my wife had I not gone and done like I of course it's nice to have the comforts, the creature comforts of life, but we say money is power, like that's a bad thing. But it's not. Money is power, but it's voluntary power. It's the opposite. If there's a yin and yang here, if there's a black and white, government power is coercion. Government power flows from the barrel of the gun, as Mao said. The capitalist power is the voluntary power. It's the power of my ability to pull something out of my wallet and give it to somebody who wants to put it in his or her or its wallet voluntarily and do something that I value in exchange for something they value. This is a positive, creative, constructive power. And not to quote another Chinese leader, but it, it is a glorious thing to have wealth and to be able to use it in a creative way.
That's right, and the way that, I've heard other people put it is that money is energy. It can direct people's work, it directs their attention.
Wait, no, we're not going to start talking about Bitcoin, are we?
No, we're not getting into that, not talking about that kind of energy. We'll get into o other energy sources soon enough since that's one of the things you focus on, but it's, human energy. It's the ability to direct what people do. It's the ability to inspire people to do more things and provide for them in a variety of ways, and through business and money, we actually can create more energy in the world. We're creating more wealth through the capitalist system. It's not finite like in physics. It's something where we actively make more money. It makes more energy.
That's it. That's why I was tilting my head because, of course, you can't just create energy in physics. And by the way, I did study physics. I started out at university as a physics major. And I'm actually agreeing with you, but I would say maybe accumulating. Perhaps like an antenna draws in energy, or a dam builds up energy, concentrates it, and makes it useful. It doesn't create it. But this is funny. I don't know how far you want to go down this rabbit hole, but in physics, the definition of it, like people think of energy as being some lightning bolt that comes out of Harry Potter's wand or a beam that comes from the Starship Enterprise. Um, None of that is actually anything to do with it, what energy actually is. In physics, the definition of energy is simply the capacity to do work. That's why a boulder on a hill has energy. It's static energy. If it becomes kinetic, it becomes more exciting. But it has the capacity to do work. If that boulder rolls down the hill, it can turn your house into a cornfield pretty quick. Um, that's the capacity to do work. So if you think about what you just said, energy, the capacity to do work, money is a way of coordinating the human capacity to do work and get things done. So it makes perfect sense to me to think of money as a form of congealed energy, maybe static when it's in your bank account.
Static when it's in your bank account and active when it's actually being deployed and used. That's absolutely right. Now, you do know a lot about energy because you're in the resources space, and I'd love for you to share a little bit more about what you've been doing in the resource investing space with everyone here, and why is this the area that you're focused on?
Well, I have to say that that certainly wasn't by design. That was Doug Casey's area, and I learned about investing in there. And so, and I should be very clear about this. So, I'm largely seen as a metals and mining guy, and you need metals, mining copper, uranium, oil. It's not quite mining, but sort of. You need extractive products, mineral resources to create or not create, to liberate energy in this world for human use. And that's what Doug did, and that's what I know. And so I stick to my knitting, stay in my wheelhouse, however you want to call that. And by that, I don't mean to say that you shouldn't buy Nvidia or Bitcoin or some other kind of assets or investment classes. That's just not what I know. So I'm not competent to guide or judge there, and I stick to what I do know. So when 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 people become clients of mine through my newsletters, I don't tell them, drop everything else, buy only what Lobo's doing, right? I say, for that portion of your portfolio that you want to allocate in the resource sector, then I can be your due diligence guy. I can put my experience to work for you. So the why is pretty simple. That's just the history of how I got there. Maybe the other why, or why bother, is that, well, in the real world, there's this almost sad joke about the dichotomy between Wall Street and Main Street these days, or these last few years. But in the real world, we have a saying that if you don't grow it, you mine it. Like, the stuff in the world has to come from somewhere, and that, I think, that is as close to literally true as anything you can find in the investment world, or even economics at large. If there's stuff in the world and you can't grow it, you have to extract it from the earth. And somebody's going to make money doing that one way or the other. Now, commodities in a big picture tend to move in big super cycles. They tend to be contracyclical to equities, commodities versus equities. Equities have had a record run for decades now. Even if you throw the crisis of 2008 in there as an interruption, and the flash crash of 2020 is a very short interruption, we've really seen historic length and magnitude of the run in equities, at least in the US. Even Japan is finally positive on the Nikkei after almost 40 years. But that can't go forever, right? The trees don't go to the moon. And if equities and commodities are contracyclical, then this actually argues for, at some point, it should be commodities' turn to catch up. And then, so that's sort of theoretically, but then you look out the window from theory to the real world out there, and you see governments all around the world printing money like there's no tomorrow. We thought they went nuts in 2008, 2009, but that's nothing compared to what they've done post COVID-19 lockdowns. And that pig has yet to work its way fully through the python. I don't know how far you want to go down this rabbit hole, but there's a lot of people out there that are convinced that Powell and company have managed the legendary soft landing. Everything's going to be fine. But certainly, as you and I record this, with gold over 2,300, copper at a 14-month high, the commodities starting to recover from a cyclical low. Right? The markets are signaling that maybe not all is quite as well in Mudville as the powers that be would have us believe.
And so, for anyone who is more involved in the venture space, which is a lot of this community, why say a little bit more about why you think commodities resources is something to include in an investment portfolio as part of that diversification?
Well, sure. The simple answer is, are you in whatever you're doing simply for ideological reasons, or are you in it to make money? And I know that there are Bitcoin hodlers that hate gold. The drop gold campaign was amusingly idiotic, but there's people who feel that way, right? That's, gold is a boomer, 20th century or 19th century, should be relegated to history thing. And there are gold bugs who hate them right back. And I think this is really unfortunate, because the real enemy is fiat. That aside, if I can tell you that I have had people on my team young people who came here through the crypto pathway. They made a bunch of money on cryptos, and then they started looking around and saying, well, how else can I make money? What other volatile assets are there out there that I can speculate on? So the crypto craze, or the crypto revolution, however you want to look at that, has educated, I think, two whole generations of younger people on the dangers of fiat currencies, of letting governments define what money is. I think it's an enormous service. And gold bugs owe the crypto crowd a thank you for that, because old boomers were never going to get Gen Z to pay attention to this. But the crypto crowd made it cool, and they managed to teach people about the dangers of fiat. So that's part one. Part two is they've made speculators out of younger generations. And a speculator, if the goal is ideological and you want to prove that Bitcoin is the one ring to rule them all in the end, fine, go ahead, knock yourself out. But if your goal is to make money, then you should be looking around at any opportunity to make money. And okay, nobody knows the future. I don't have a functioning crystal ball, no Palantir here. But what I just said about the cycles, what I said about what gold is signaling right now, my experience in the resource sector tells me that there is a lot of money to be made. So that's why.
What's interesting is that you're talking about speculation, and most of the time when I hear that word, people use it derogatorily, and you're using it in a very positive way. And speculation is importantly different from investing. So, how would you differentiate those two concepts, and why is speculation a good thing in your industry and what you do?
No, I understand the question. And of course, Doug Casey famously, his newsletter for 3 or 4 decades, whatever it ran, was the International Speculator. And by the way, when I started my own business, riffing on Doug, I asked him, I said, I want to call it the Independent Speculator. Are you okay with that? And, he gave me his blessing. Me, Randy, Rothbard, Brandon, he said it was okay. Uh, he's an atheist. What else was he going to say? Right. So yes, it's kind of like one of these things. Remember my Snidely Whiplash comments at the beginning? I don't think most people have actually thought this through. We're just told that speculation is evil. Those are those people that hoarded gasoline or food before a war and then sold it at high prices. But you know what? If you were a Jewish family desperate to get out of Germany in 1939 and some evil speculator had hoarded the gasoline you needed, and you paid him in diamonds and furs to give you that gasoline so you could get out of Germany, you were happy that that guy had hoarded and was willing to sell you, at a price that would save your life. Right? So the evil speculator that foresaw the difficulty and provided for it provides a public service in time of need. That's actually not evil for them to get paid for seeing what the masses don't see, for getting ahead of the curve. And that's what makes it speculation. The difference between speculation and investment is a deployment of capital for expected return. And it can go wrong. Like you invest in a shoe factory or something and there's an earthquake, it gets knocked down. But in general, you know what the shoe market is. People aren't going to stop needing shoes. You invest in a shoe business and it's a reasonable rate of return to be expected. Or bonds, that they're going to pay you a certain rate. That's an investment. You know what you're going to get for your capital. What makes something a speculation is you don't really know. You're betting, though. You're willing to bet. There is an element of chance here. You're betting that you understand something that the market doesn't, or that the majority has got wrong. You're willing to be a contrarian. You're willing to position yourself for what you see is coming, right? And there's opportunity there. And so it is different from investment, and you should understand. It's important to be honest about that. I don't call it high stakes investing because I think that would be misleading, right? There's no guaranteed return in what I do. Now, I've consistently made more money than I've lost. And you can say, oh, well, that's dumb luck. Past results don't guarantee future performance, as they like to say. But I think after a few decades, you can't just write that off as a random chance. But it is important to understand that you are taking chances and not kid yourself about how secure this is. And if you're uncomfortable with that, if you're retired on fixed income and you can't afford to risk your nest egg, you probably shouldn't do what I'm doing. Or at most, if you like gold, see it as a safe haven, buy the gold. Don't speculate on the gold stocks the way I do, right? So yes, speculation really is different from investment, and there is higher risk there, but we bother because there's also higher reward, and it doesn't. There's no evil there. If you're a hoarding speculator, which is the negative example, you didn't steal that gasoline or food from somebody else. You bought it when nobody else wanted it. You bought low and then sold high later. There was no crime there. There was no one harmed, and the people buying it from you at dearer prices, at that point, they want it. They want what you have had the wisdom and foresight to save up more than they want the money that they have that they're giving you. Now, their unfortunate circumstance, if it is indeed an unfortunate circumstance, it can also be greed. Like right now, people piling into gold now, it's not because they're trying to escape Germany in 1939. It's greed that's piling them in now. So those people paying more for that gold now are rewarding the speculators who bought at lower prices, who are now willing to supply them at these higher prices. There's nothing unethical about that. There's nothing wrong or even excessively Snidely Whiplash deserving in that sort of behavior. So it's just not wrong. And it's funny. I remember explaining this to a guy can't remember if I think it was Peru, but it was either that in the mountains of Ecuador. It was somewhere down there. I think it was Peru. And there was this guy who had this farm, una finca in la montaña. And he had this farm where he grew his potatoes or something. And a company was exploring for gold there. And they needed his land to put a drill rig on it and put a hole in the ground, see if there was any gold in the basement rocks there. And so the farmer was paid some money to access his land, and he was okay with that. But he was a little bit worried about, well, what happens if there's a mine here? What happens to my farm? And we started talking, and I told him, my business, I'm a speculator. And he looked at me like I had two heads and three arms, like, green skin. And like, oh, I thought you were a nice guy. Right? And so he had that prejudice. And so I started talking to him about it. And I explained about buying low, selling high. And I said, well, you suppose that they find a gold mine here, and you can sell your potato farm for 10 times more money than you would make in 100 years growing potatoes here. Would that make you bad or wrong? That you had the fortune to be in the right place in the right time, and you had the asset that they want. They're going to pay you much more than your farm is worth. Are you wrong to take that money? Is there anything evil about you? And he's like, no, no. Well, I said, well, that's speculation, and there's a chance there for you. It's not guaranteed. Maybe you'll be growing potatoes for the rest of your life. But he understood. He's like, it was one of the few times where I could really consciously remember changing an adult's mind. I'm used to teaching college kids, but this guy was older than I am now. He's a bent little old Peruvian potato farmer, and sitting there talking by the drill rig, I got him to look at speculation in a different way, and that was a lot of fun.
That's a great way of differentiating those two concepts. But as you said, you've been successful in your speculation. And I'm curious, given that you're taking a chance, you're going against the grain from what most other people think, is there anything you can share for your process for picking winners in the industry and how you go about that?
Okay, well, I guess I've got good news and bad news. Let's start with the bad news, in that there is an emotional disposition here. You have to be willing to go against the grain. Another famous libertarian speculator, Rick Rule, likes to say that in this business, you're either a contrarian or you're roadkill waiting to happen. Right? That there's just no other choice. If you go with the herd, you will buy high and sell low, because these aren't mainstream investments. If people are piling in, if the herd is piling in, then prices are going to be high. The fact that everybody's piling in and it looks safe, everybody's talking about it. If something is the flavor of the day, that means that you're not buying low. And then prices fluctuate. Commodities are famously volatile. The markets turn, and then people are like, I've lost 50%. They panic and they sell. So people who cannot be a contrarian, who don't have the intestinal fortitude to be a contrarian, they frequently set themselves up for failure in this space. So honestly, I have to say this may not be for you if you're very uncomfortable going against the herd. Now, the good news is we're talking to a libertarian audience, I think largely libertarian audience. Most libertarians are already going against the herd, right? Their wings are for birds. They're not left wing, right wing. They're libertarians on the top of the pyramid there. So I think for most people, this isn't actually bad news. It's actually good news. And I'd go farther and say that your libertarian mindset might have seemed like a liability your entire life. You don't get invited to the fancy dinner parties. You don't get the, if like me, you were the black sheep of your family, you know what I'm talking about. But even not, if not, the charming Sasha McCoben, I doubt he was the black sheep of his family, but still you have other people moving away from you on the Group W bench because you start talking about anarchism and minarchism and why do we even need a Federal Reserve anyway? And nobody wants to talk to you anymore. But this is actually a vitally important asset, I think, to speculators. Maybe not momentum chasers on Wall Street, but a contrarian, independent speculator. It's a great thing to not drink the mainstream Kool-Aid, because sooner or later the lemmings are going to get it wrong and they're going to go charging off that cliff. And if you're on Team Biden and you think Bidenomics has saved the world and the United States economy is the greatest. I mean, just yesterday, Biden said we have the greatest economy in the world. So if you're so into that camp, in tune with that ideology that you've got Biden blinders on, and I'm using an easy example here, right? You will make investment mistakes. If you believe the United States economy is the greatest economy in the world, you're going to make investment mistakes. Not even just speculative mistakes. You're going to make investment mistakes. So the ability to free yourself from that mindset, I think, is important. Now, on the flip side, just to be equal opportunity here, Trump said much the same when he was in the White House. And if you believe that, then you made investment mistakes. And okay, the Trump tax breaks were good. I'm not trying to get political here. The point is that left wing, right wing doesn't matter. If you're in one of the mainstream camps, you get surrounded by your echo chamber of people that believe the same that you do. And this sets you up for failure. You have to be independent to be a contrarian. Contrarian isn't just somebody who says, well, whatever everybody else says, I disagree. That's just being obnoxious and disagreeable. A real contrarian is somebody who thinks for him or herself. And I think that is spectacularly useful to investors and speculators because you can see something. I'm sure we'll get there, but just real quick, like uranium was so unpopular, but so necessary. As Rick Rule would say, it was obvious that either the price of uranium had to go up because it was below the cost of production for years, and either the price of uranium had to go up or the lights wouldn't go on in large parts of the world because we still use nuclear power, unpopular as it is. So it took a while for that to be right. It took a lot of contrarian, independent courage to buy into that thesis and buy low and wait to be right. But it's gone from $18 to over $100, in recent years. So Rick was right. That's the kind of example I mean of being able to think independently, and as a libertarian having the advantage of not drinking the Kool-Aid from the left or the right. This is actually something that you can think of it as your mini superpower here, and I would encourage your audience to make best use of it.
I love using the contrarian thinking of a lot of people who are part of the ecosystem as a superpower. That is a great way to end this. But before we do, I want to see, is there anything that we haven't covered, Lobo, that you would really want to share or give advice to the Liberty Ventures ecosystem on?
Be skeptical. This is much in my mind. And by the way, even fellow libertarians, the bell curve applies to all populations, even libertarians. So there are going to be some libertarians who are scammers and evil. They will lie to you. They will steal from you. There are libertarian criminals out there. So just like Republicans or Democrats or Americans or Russians or whoever, we all have our angels and demons on any population. So be skeptical of everyone, even of me. Do your own due diligence, question everything, all that kind of stuff. But just real quickly, we've only covered on a couple things. I want to say that my outlook right now is that the global economy is in a deepening recession. I do not think American exceptionalism will save the United States. I think the labor hoarding post-pandemic has distorted the way the American economy looks, but we're headed through the ringer. But the powers that be will respond with more, free money helicopters. This has investment implications. You can find out more in my free newsletter. You don't even have to pay me to find out what I think about that. But the takeaway here is I think more bad stuff is coming to Main Street, and I think the powers that be will likely respond as we've seen them in recent years. This has clear implications for commodities, monetary metals, and beyond.
And just real quick, where can people find that newsletter if they want to learn more from you, Lobo?
Sure. It's at independentspeculator.com. It's called the Speculator's Digest. And I can't promise you'll agree with everything I say or whatever, but I can promise one thing, and that is that if you sign up, we will not spam you with a flood of daily advertisements. I hate that kind of hyped up marketing. You get one email per week. If you don't like it, you can unsubscribe anytime and we won't hassle you.
Lobo, this has been so much fun and so insightful. Thank you for joining this and just for being an amazing person. I love how things come full circle in life.
Thank you, Sasha, and for everything you've done for the world, the liberty movement, and now for capitalism. Go get them.
Thank you. You too.